into Outkick the Show. I am your fearless leader. I hope you guys are having fantastic Wednesdays wherever you are. I am playing hurt. I've been sick for the last 2 days. I've barely gotten out of bed. Have done the radio show, have done the TV show, have been writing though, but I have barely been able to get out of bed. I hope it's not the coronavirus. I leave for Mexico on Saturday. So the hope is to be well before then. We got a lot to get to. There were a lot of stories yesterday I wanted to get to. Tony Romo. I broke this story on Outkick early this morning and then wrote about it on the website. Tony Romo poised to get $15 to $20 million a year to call games, the most ever. I'll explain why. Bernie Sanders' huge New Hampshire win, I actually think it's being underrated how massive this win was based on everything else. Mel Tucker to Michigan State for $5.3 million per season, reportedly doubling his salary to go to Michigan State after being at Colorado for 1 year. Rivers and Brady both poised for the first free agency of their football lives, and Myles Garrett officially reinstated to the NFL after being suspended for the remainder of the year. But we begin with Tony Romo, who is poised to surpass John Madden on an inflation-adjusted basis and become the highest-paid announcer in the history of sports in America. Why is that going to happen? The timing on this is absolutely perfect. First, the background. Tony Romo makes $3 million a year, reportedly, based on what I've heard right now. He is in a contract which allows CBS to match whatever offer he receives from anywhere else. And so, what is going on here is ESPN keeps raising the overall salary of Tony Romo, and CBS keeps matching it. We are now over $15 million, I am told, that there has been a match for Tony Romo. Now, if you're in the announce business, I think you got to be rooting for Romo to make as much money as you possibly can, because usually a rising tide lifts all boats. But again, CBS and ESPN are dueling. What's the bigger story here? Both of these companies are trying to establish to the NFL how desperately committed they are to the NFL and to the idea of big games. Let's start with ESPN. They want to move Monday Night Football simulcast on ABC as well as ESPN because the number of cable and satellite subscribers continues to decline precipitously. So they want to go to the NFL and say, hey, we want to put Monday Night Football on ESPN, but we also want to simulcast it on ABC. As part of that, we would also like for you to put us in the Super Bowl rotation so that instead of every 3 years, it being CBS, NBC, and Fox, ABC gets into that rotation too, and it would be CBS, NBC, Fox, and ABC if they go in that manner with all four of those. And ESPN is also asking that Monday Night Football games be able to be flexed like happens with Sunday Night Football now, so they don't end up with end-of-the-year games that don't matter at all. So all of that is a part of ESPN's package. Now, you might say, well, $15 or $20 million a year sounds insane. Well, not really, because if you think about it, Fox just did over $500 million in 1 day in advertising revenue for the Super Bowl, okay? Over $500 million in 1 day. So if, let's say, in an 8-year deal, you could get 2 Super Bowls and Tony Romo helps that happen, that's $1 billion. If you get better games, that's probably hundreds of millions of dollars more in overall revenue. So that's the angle that ESPN is pursuing. If we get Tony Romo, we plug him in, we remake our Monday Night Football booth, which has been a mess ever since John Gruden left. 2 years ago, they brought in Jason Witten, Booger McFarland, and Joe Tessitore. This past year, they went with Joe Tessitore and Booger McFarland. They've got to figure out what works. If they get Romo, boom, they slot him in, and everything is off and running. That's the ESPN perspective. For CBS, they just lost the SEC game of the week to ESPN. If they also lose their lead announcer, who they have the right to match, a lot of people, I think, will start asking the question, what is the long-term commitment of CBS to CBS Sports? Are they going to pony up the dollars that they need to retain their seat at the table for big-time athletic events? The NFL is imperative for everyone out there. Nobody can really afford to do away with it. And so CBS looks at Romo as a sign that is an important sign to the NFL that they want to remain committed to the NFL. And it's an important sign because they don't want to lose a second straight battle to Disney over this situation. The big beneficiary here is Tony Romo. He's got two multi-billion-dollar corporations that see him as a linchpin for their strategy in the NFL. And as a result, ESPN keeps putting more money into the center of the table, and CBS keeps matching. We'll see what ends up happening here, but the end result is going to be Tony Romo signs a monumental deal. Now, there are a lot of other aspects of this that are going to be the fallout. Let's say, for instance, that you're CBS and you lose Romo. You already demoted Phil Simms. I'm curious what suggestions you guys would have on Facebook and Periscope. Who do you bring in to sit alongside of Jim Nantz in the event that you lose Tony Romo? It's not an easy solution because there's not a name that immediately leaps up to the top of the horizon. Maybe you go out and you offer $10 million to Peyton Manning at CBS. Maybe you offer $15 million to Peyton Manning. Maybe you make him refuse to say no. Boomer Esiason is a possibility. I know a lot of you guys listen to his morning radio show in the New York area. There are a lot of intriguing options that CBS would have, but remember, they've got Super Bowl 55. So whoever they hire has to hit the ground running and be really good with Jim Nantz by the time February of next year comes around so that they could be actually ready and able to host the Super Bowl. So this is a massive story in the world of sports media. Tony Romo poised to become the highest paid person in all of sports media history when it comes to calling games. This is a big story, and I think you're right. I think a lot of people out there saying there'd be a lot of interest for CBS at $15 million a year. The other thing is this is the rising tide lifts all boats scenario. If you are calling games, then your value is going to go up as well because you're going to look around and say, wait a minute, what about Romo? Think about a guy like Kirk Herbstreit, who right now is the college football voice of ESPN, but he also does College Game Day. He does all of their playoff shows. I mean, this guy is worth lots more money if suddenly ESPN is bringing in Tony Romo at $15 million a year. If you're Herbstreit, don't you have to say, hey, I'm worth at least $10 million. I'm doing more work than this. So this is a story that is worth following. And I always say this, a lot of people don't get it. But you should root for other people in your field to be successful. And I talk about this all the time. I want Stephen A. to make as much money as he possibly can. I want Colin Cowherd to make as much money as he can. I want Skip Bayless to make as much money as they can. I want them to raise up the overall level of value for people who are in my field of work, just like if you are an NFL quarterback, you want Patrick Mahomes to make $40 million plus. Whatever you do for a living, don't be a hater. Root for other people with similar jobs as you to do well in the financial universe, because if you're doing your job well, that will inure to your benefit. There are a lot of people out there that are zero summers. I have never been a zero summer guy because my thought is there's not just one pie. The pie's always expanding. If you do your job well, then sooner or later you're going to be able to take advantage of somebody who's older than you or better than you being well compensated. Your goal should be to climb up in their background and continue to get better. Like Cowherd, Stephen A, and Skip are all older than me, but I want them to kill it. I want them to absolutely kill it because in the future, I want to be the next generation. I want there to be younger kids than me who are looking around saying, man, I hope Clay Travis one day is making $10 million a year to do his radio and television show because I want to be the next Clay Travis, or $15 million a year, whatever it is. That's the way the market's going. Sometimes it takes big leaps like what's happening right now with Tony Romo, but it's a fascinating story to follow. All right, Bernie, I think this is being totally misunderstood. One of the reasons I enjoy talking about politics is I think many people out there don't really understand how to look at the chessboard and analyze politics purely from a game theory perspective. So I think what happened in New Hampshire is a massive win for Bernie Sanders, even though he only won by a couple of points or whatever it is, right? Let me explain why. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have been fighting to be the progressive candidate, the left-wing nominee in the Democratic nomination. For a long time, it seemed like Elizabeth Warren might move past Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has a heart attack. Elizabeth Warren is surging in the summer. Now we get to New Hampshire, which is a state very close to Massachusetts that she represents, also close to where Bernie is, and Elizabeth Warren goes out and gets crushed. She comes in 4th overall and nowhere near the race. She is close. I think on Super Tuesday, she will end up having to step aside and drop out of the race. I think Bernie has almost waxed her, right? And as a result, that leaves Bernie Sanders. Almost all of her supporters are going to come to Bernie Sanders because he becomes the left-wing candidate. Meanwhile, even though he didn't win by a huge amount, this is a big story too. I want you guys to pay attention to it. You've got a bunch of moderate candidates all knocking each other out that are keeping a moderate alternative from arising contrary to Bernie Sanders. You've got, and I jotted them all down, Mayor Pete, Klobuchar, Biden, and Bloomberg all competing for that moderate wing of the Democratic Party. Well, when Klobuchar and Mayor Pete and Biden and Bloomberg about to come in on Super Tuesday, all of them are going to be competing on Super Tuesday. And instead of having to battle against all 4 of them for Bernie Sanders, he only has to wax Elizabeth Warren, and he solidifies the progressive mantle in the Democratic race. I think this race now is Bernie Sanders to lose because I don't see Klobuchar, Biden, Bloomberg, or Mayor Pete dropping out anytime soon. That means after Super Tuesday, the progressive candidate, the left wing, the socialist, if you want to call him that, remaining is going to be Bernie. He's going to solidify all of the left-wing candidates, and all of those moderate candidates are going to be going head-to-head, keeping them from getting a substantial majority. What needs to happen if you're going to beat Bernie is the moderate candidates have to recognize that they can't all continue to be in this race. They need to start to drop out. The problem is they've all had, assuming Biden does decently in South Carolina, enough success to convince them that they need to stay in the race. I think that Bernie should be a prohibitive favorite right now to be the nominee. And it may well end up being Bernie versus Bloomberg before all is said and done. But by the time it's Bernie versus Bloomberg, the problem may be Bloomberg may not have a chance to actually go out and get a majority because there's too many people left in the moderate lane. That's why you have to think about these competitions from a game theory perspective. You have the left wing, which has been Bernie versus Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie has won the left wing argument. And then you have the moderate, and nobody has emerged as the moderate alternative. Really what needs to happen is the moderates all need to come together, acknowledge who they think is the best candidate, and everybody else needs to bail, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I think there's 2 outcomes here that are potentially in play. One is Bernie becomes the nominee, and he is a prohibitive favorite. I believe he's the only candidate that can get the nomination through grabbing the delegates. The other is a contested convention, because I don't think all of these moderates are going to be able to get the delegates necessary to be able to rise up and win the nomination. So it's Bernie or bust, I believe, for the Democrats in terms of having a candidate with a locked-in nomination by the time they get to the convention. Well, if that doesn't happen, if Bernie doesn't have the nomination, then everything gets thrown into an uproar, because you would think that if Bernie's people, after he dominates all through the primary and gets the most delegates, if again the Democratic Party doesn't allow him to be the standard bearer, then there is going to be an absolute uproar in the Bernie camp, because they're going to say the DNC screwed us in 2016 and the DNC is trying to screw us again in 2020. I think the best possible candidate that the Democrats could bring to bear in a contested convention is Michelle Obama. She could put back together the Obama coalition. Instead, I think Bernie is going to be your Democratic nominee, and I think it's because he's won the left-wing race in the party, which a lot of people are ignoring. I think Elizabeth Warren is going to have to drop out after Super Tuesday, unless the party tries to tell her not to drop out, because all of her supporters are going to go to Bernie. So this is a story that I haven't seen written anywhere. I haven't seen any analysis from this perspective. That is the game theory why New Hampshire was so important in terms of what it brings together for Bernie as he goes forward. All right, a couple of other things. Mel Tucker to Michigan State for $5.3 million, leaving Colorado after 1 year. We have a great wins and losses podcast up with Mel Tucker, where he talks about what I think is a really difficult beginning to his coaching career when he was a graduate assistant for Nick Saban at Michigan State, sleeping under his desk. That's how many hours he was working. That's how much he embraced the grind. This is emblematic of a larger storyline that I don't believe a lot have noticed. The SEC and the Big Ten are lapping the conferences elsewhere in the Big 12, the Pac-12, and the ACC. They have the amount of money to spend that nobody else even approaches having the money to spend, and it's only going to get more significant as the CBS deal is moving to ESPN. Pac-12 and Colorado liked Mel Tucker. They couldn't keep him. Now, some people out there are going to say, oh, I blame Mel Tucker. He only stayed a year. If somebody doubles your salary, I don't blame you for leaving and taking a doubling of the salary, particularly when you're moving from a lower tier Pac-12 job to a bit higher tier job in a Michigan State. So I don't blame Mel Tucker for making that move. If you can double your salary and go to a better job, I think it's a move you have to make. Now for Colorado, the question is, what do they do? An easy call is Eric Bieniemy at Kansas City, where he's the offensive coordinator there. But he's probably going to get an opportunity to be an NFL head coach at some point in the near future. So would you want to give that up in order to go back to your alma mater, to the place where you were, I believe, a wide receivers coach, as well as an offensive coordinator? That'll probably be a difficult decision for him to make going forward. Congrats to Mel Tucker. I think it's a good hire by Michigan State. And ultimately, they just deployed the Clay Travis dump truck theory. When Luke Fickell said no, when Pat Narduzzi said no, Mel Tucker initially said no, and they said, how much money is it going to take for you to leave? And they were able to eventually persuade him to go. All right, Phillip Rivers, free agent, first time in his career, 38 years old. I think there are two teams that it makes sense for Phillip Rivers to join. One, and the more I think about it, the more it makes sense, I think the Colts. I think the Colts make the most sense for Phillip Rivers. They weren't that sold on Jacoby Brissett. They get a bridge with Phillip Rivers to a young quarterback. I think that makes a lot of sense. The second one that I believe makes sense, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. With Chris Godwin, with Mike Evans, and with Perryman, as well as O.J. Howard at tight end. If you have Bruce Arians, who has worked well with a veteran quarterback before in Carson Palmer, if you have Bruce Arians, you can have potentially another couple of good years. I think that the Colts, with Frank Reich, who is the former offensive coordinator of Phillip Rivers, and I think that Bruce Arians with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers make the most sense for Phillip Rivers going forward. If Rivers goes to the Colts, this is an intriguing question. What if you had to choose between your quarterback being, think about this for a minute, what if you had to choose between your quarterback being Teddy Bridgewater or Jameis Winston? Who would you take? Let me know, who would you take? Teddy Bridgewater or Jameis Winston? Who would you rather have as your quarterback going forward? I want to give Teddy Bridgewater props for this statement that he posted. I saw on, I believe, Instagram, but I tweeted it out. And a lot of you are saying Teddy Bridgewater beyond a shadow of a doubt. You can see all the comments rolling in here. Teddy Bridgewater, in terms of having a positive influence, he wrote this yesterday. To the young boy who woke up this morning and had to prepare yourself for the harsh realities of this world on your own because your mama's job schedule is hectic. To the young boy that's afraid to read out loud in front of the class because the fear of mispronouncing words is greater than the fear of hearing gunshots throughout the night. To the young boy who finds happiness in free lunch at school because that's the only meal you will eat that day. To the young boy that looks forward to practice but hates when practice ends because that's the only place you find joy in the world, and once practice is over, it's back to the struggle. To the young boy dealing with the pressure of running with his boys to do foolish things. To the young boy that looked upon as lame for making the right decisions. To the young boy whose path is headed straight down the road to jail or death because of the environment you live in. To the young boy that's going to graduate high school. To the young boy that's going to be the first of his family to graduate college. To the young boy that's going to live out his dream and change the world. I was once in your shoes. I believe in you. I don't know how you can root against a guy like Teddy Bridgewater. Again, that post that I just ran through is pretty fantastic from Teddy Bridgewater. And if you haven't seen that, I tweeted it out on my social media account. You can see it at Clay Travis on Twitter. Teddy Bridgewater using his platform to elevate for many people around the world who may be looking at him as a role model given the injury he had at Minnesota. It's hard not to root for him to be a starting quarterback going forward. That was pretty fantastic in general. I got to give credit to Teddy Bridgewater for that statement. In an era when so much of what is said is conflicting and angry in this world, what an incredible statement by Teddy Bridgewater. Tom Brady, I continue to fluctuate on what I think he's going to do. But at this point, the more and more I look at it, I believe Brady's going to stay in New England. I think he wants everybody to basically fawn over him. He wants to hit free agency for the first time in his career and hear everybody say at the age of 43, oh, you still got it, Tom. You're still the player you've always been. He wants to hear that from the Chargers, the Raiders, maybe the Titans, maybe as well the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Colts, all of those teams that are in the mix to potentially sign a quarterback, maybe as well the Dallas Cowboys. But I think when he looks at all of the numbers out there, the most likely location for Tom Brady, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is to stay in New England and have them follow him with more weapons on the offensive side of the ball. To me, that's the conclusion that I come to as I spend more and more time looking at it. Finally, Myles Garrett is back in the league after his helmet swinging incident. I think this is the right punishment. The NFL gets criticized a lot for not getting things right when it comes to punishment. I think that Myles Garrett having to serve out a suspension for the remainder of the year was the right number. I think bringing him back in this offseason to be ready for week 1 for the Browns makes a lot of sense. And so I think the NFL 100% got this suspension right. They get criticized for getting much wrong, but I think it makes a lot of sense going forward. All right. Love all of you. Hope you enjoyed the show. I got to get ready to go do Lock It In now. Playing hurt, playing sick, but there are a lot of stories I wanted to address here. Flu game, like Jordan back in the day, Periscope performance. I'm hoping that I can be ready back to fighting shape tomorrow. But in the meantime, DBAP unless you need to SBAP. My name is Clay Travis. This has been Outkick the Show. Kisses. See y'all. Love you. Thank you, Facebook. See y'all.